Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of the syndicated talk show People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and of course, successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can always email me directly through benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And people, we are very excited to showcase this next guest here on our network, so do me a favor. Sit back, strap in, and get ready for a wonderful ride. And on the line with us today, we have Barry I. Gold. We're going to be discussing his amazing book, We're Overdosed. Available for purchase through Amazon as well as barnesandnoble.com. But people, in addition to this fantastic book, Barry has written 2 other books that you're going to want to get your hands on as well. Of course, We're Overdosed is the anchor for today's interview, so it's really going to be the one that we spend the majority of the time talking about. But check out his other 2 books. One is called Operation Independence Day, which is a fictional narrative, so you can just get lost in that. And really, just on a rainy day, this is something you want to add to your shelf. Also, we have Gin and Tonic, Heroin in the Pharmaceutical Industry, a historical narrative of the origin of heroin and aspirin, and a lot more to happen. I'm telling you, these are books that you're going to want to add to your shelf. But as I mentioned, We're Overdosed is the anchor for today. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, but check out his personal website, barrygoldwriter.com, to gather more information on everything that he has in store. Amazon and Barnes & Noble are where you got to go for purchasing, but barrygoldwriter.com is where you're going to want to go for communication purposes and also for a lot of information. And before we go any further, I want to take this opportunity and point out that Barry was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by one of the best advertising firms in the business. And people, if you follow us, you already know I'm talking about Quipper Prints. So listen, for my writers out there, if you have gone through your process, you have invested countless amounts of hours creating your narrative, and you finally have done it. You've completed it, you're at the end of the road, but you realize now you need help moving the book you just created. Well, if that's you, contact Quipper Prints. I'm telling you, they're one of the best in the business to do it, and this is exactly what they specialize in. So head on over to quipperprints.com today and gather all of the ways that their fantastic team is going to help you do just that. And like I mentioned, Barry is someone to be recognized. Barry is someone to be reckoned with. I'm telling you, people, remember the name, okay? Because Barry I. Gold is someone you're going to be coming into contact with very shortly. His book, We're Overdosed, it's going to revolve around a subject matter that is difficult to discuss a lot of times. People, when we talk about the opioid epidemic that we have seen in recent years here in the States, this is a hot topic across the board. The pharmaceutical industry has been demonized in a lot of ways, and listen, rightfully so to certain degrees. But we understand that it's not all bad. When it comes to the opioid epidemic, well, there's a lot of blame to go around, and the pharmaceutical companies hold a lot of that. But what's great about Barry's book is he is utilizing his experience in the pharmaceutical industry to back his points. And people understand that this is an informative narrative. By no means is Barry saying one thing is right or one thing is wrong. What he is offering is a lot of information, not only with the history of opium, but also with the opioid industry and the pharmaceutical industry and how it is utilized. In addition to that, he offers advice in terms of if you are an addict out there, the resources that are available to you, the process of recovering from that addiction, but also what the government needs to do and how it can play its part in assisting a lot of its citizens that find themselves caught in this dangerous storm. People, according to the CDC, just in 2021 alone, there were over 100,000 deaths related to drug overdose. Well, as if that statistic isn't as alarming enough, over 75% of those related deaths were due to opioid drugs. This is something that affects an astronomical amount of our population. This is something that a lot of you listening in probably have some type of experience with. Either you have taken opioids yourself or you know someone that has. This is an informative book that needs to be on your shelf for so many reasons, but one of the main ones, at least for me, is chances are, like I mentioned, you have some influence with it already. Well, even though it's a difficult conversation to have, even though it's something we would like to avoid at all possible costs, if we know that this is something that affects such a large portion of the population, shouldn't we be informed? There's a lot happening, and there's a lot that I can say. The best thing that I could possibly do is invite Barry here onto the line with us so that he can offer his expertise and offer the information that is found in his book, because it is valuable to no end. So without further ado, let's jump right in, because people understand he is the expert. He is more qualified than most to discuss these matters. So like I said to you before, sit back, strap in, and have your notebooks ready. Barry, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolutely. Listen, it is a true pleasure. Barry, as I mentioned in my opening, I think when we hear the term opioid, right, or opium in this instance, we have a very specific connotation nowadays. Given how many opioid-related drug overdoses that we see in recent times here in the States, there is a lot happening with this, and there are a lot of people that have been affected by this particular drug. So I'm really looking forward to this discussion that we're getting ready to have, because a lot of times people just look at the negative aspects, and although there are a lot of them, when we look at the history of the drug, this is something that has been around for quite some time. So I'm looking forward to having different perspectives shared, and this is really what your book represents. A lot of the information found in it is very educational and very informative. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for being here as a guest to discuss it. Barry, before we go into your book, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background.
Well, I am a scientist by training. I have a PhD in pharmacology, the science of drug action. It is a medical course, and when I finished all my education, I taught medical school for 6 years. I did not get tenure, so I left the educational community and moved into the pharmaceutical industry. I have managed a pharmaceutical research and development laboratory, and I've managed worldwide drug development by managing the team process we used to manage that development. I capped my career by working for a German company in that capacity, managing drug development, and it required my presence in Europe every other weekend. So I've worked all over Europe. I've worked in the United States, and I'm retired now, and now I write full time. But I'm also a single parent, and I have a 14-year-old whom I take care of.
You know, that as a parent myself, Barry, that's a handful in and of itself. You may be retired, but you basically just picked up another job, right? Because children have a lot that they put you through, right? I mean, it's a new journey every single day.
Not a problem. I have 2 older children as well.
Of course. Fantastic. Well, Barry, again, welcome to the network, man. This is a true pleasure. And one thing that I took from that previous answer, amongst a lot, is Barry he's more qualified than most to talk about this particular topic of discussion. The information, found in this book is coming from a very knowledgeable place. And without further ado, Barry, the anchor is all about your amazing book, We're Overdosed. Tell us a little bit more about it.
Well, We're Overdosed started life as a history of aspirin, until I realized that aspirin and heroin were made by the same chemist. And that little piece of information triggered me to begin to write about morphine the morphine history.
Mm-hmm.
But I realized very quickly that history books have a limited marketplace. And at the same time, the information I was uncovering about morphine and the opiates and opioid drugs, and the difference is an opiate comes from a plant and opioid drugs come from a laboratory.
Yeah.
I began to let the book take over my intellect, and I spent the next 4 years researching it and writing it out of intellectual interest.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I bring to task is not only my scientific training, but my ability to translate technical information into information any educated person can understand. And I see my marketplace, or my market, as college-educated non-scientists.
Yeah. You know, Barry, my follow-up question is going to go into inspiration. It's clear to me, given your background, that this is something that would have been of particular interest to you. Of course, as you mentioned, you know, you're talking about just the spark of interest that came from learning that the creator of aspirin and heroin were the same chemist, right? The same person. And that really embarked you and it was the precipice to set forth on this particular journey. So we understand why this was of interest to you. But this very easily could have been something you comprised and kept on your personal shelf. Why did you feel compelled to, or inspired to, write the book and put it out for the masses?
I view myself as a teacher. Now, I haven't been in education in many years,
Mm-hmm.
but I still view myself as a teacher. And I view my book as an instrument of education. I've said that already. My inspiration to write the book was to share my knowledge with people. That's all. And I tell the story that many years ago, I taught a course on weekends at Jersey City State College in New Jersey to recovering drug addicts studying for certification as drug counselors. And during lunch, all my entire class surrounded me and they leaned over and said, "Can we ask you a question?" I said, "Of course." And they leaned over to me and said, "Why do you teach us? Are you an addict?" I said, "No, why do you ask?" And the answer was, "Because no one but other addicts are interested in us." And that was so tragic a statement. It stayed with me 20 years and became the first chapter in my book.
Wow. Yeah, that is it. Yeah, that is very.
No one is interested in us.
Very unfortunate. It's very unfortunate, and a great segue that you've established, because now I want to go a little bit more into that education that you provide, not only in this book, but you have provided. And listen, whether you're in the classroom or out of the classroom, as an educator, I don't think you ever stop teaching, right? I mean, this is kind of what you do, and all my educator friends and family members in my inner circle would kind of attest to the same thing. But Barry, as I mentioned, the opioid epidemic is something that has really taken, I would probably say the world, but I know definitely here in the States, it's taken America by storm. I mean, the CDC has statistics that they had put out that just in 2021, I believe, there were over 100,000 drug-related overdose deaths. Over 75% of those deaths were due in part to opioid abuse. Talk to us a little bit more about how to be educated. Where does someone begin? How do we prevent opioid deaths? I know this is probably a very large and almost unfair question to ask, but if we're talking about the education, where does one even begin?
Well, we begin by reading and learning as much as we can, so we can speak from education and not from ignorance. You mentioned that in 2021 we killed over 100,000 with drug overdose. In 2022, we killed 110,000. It continues to rise.
Yeah.
Now, that statistic is telling. When we had a COVID epidemic 2 years ago in our country, COVID was on the news every night. And there were pictures of people wearing masks, and offices were closed, schools were closed, and the news couldn't get enough of that.
Mm-hmm.
And yet COVID was killing maybe 70,000 a year. And here opioids are killing 110,000 a year or more next year. And it's not on the news. And that upsets me.
Yeah.
That suggests to me that people are looking at drug abusers as not worthy of the news. And that's completely against my personal policy, which is everyone is important and everyone can teach us something.
You know, Barry, another side of this, and you know, maybe I'm diving down the rabbit hole here, but something that I think can't be overlooked, and when you're talking about the coverage that these deaths related to opioid abuse have received in comparison to, like you were talking about, the COVID pandemic that we were going through a few years ago, and we start to see a resurgence of that now. That's a different story. But the money that is made from a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, we know, is astronomical. The profit in what is to be gained is something that is, I mean, listen, to use a term, it's criminal. What is happening and what a lot of these companies are getting away with. Talk to us and shine some light on what do you think the influence that these pharmaceutical companies have on maybe that coverage or the abuse and why it continues to happen and increase.
Well, first of all, I don't let anyone badmouth the pharmaceutical industry because they supported me for 40 years.
Right.
And I enjoyed it very much working for them.
Mm-hmm.
But that said, there also has been problems with OxyContin that was synthesized or licensed into a small Connecticut company named Purdue Pharma.
Yeah.
And they were excellent marketers, and they marketed OxyContin for what it was worth and sold billions of dollars worth. And they're blamed, the management of Purdue Pharma, they're blamed very much for causing the epidemic through their marketing of OxyContin. So, by the same token, the entire pharmaceutical company provides jobs for America. They gave us smallpox vaccine, they gave us COVID vaccine, and they gave us insulin. We can't argue with them. Furthermore, they are part of the local economy. They provide jobs. They provide employment for educated people. They provide medicines for people. So I don't badmouth the industry. What I say is the industry for a while forgot its morality.
Mm-hmm.
And what they were doing was saying, well, there's a market for opiate drugs. We should get into that market. And they all followed suit and started marketing a new opiate drug. Well, does the world or does the US marketplace really need 12 opiates on the market? No. We need a few injectable opiates. We need a few oral opiates. We need a few that we squirt up our nose. And that's all. So we have to begin to get control of this. I'm going to market this because the industry is crying for it. That attitude is not a management concept. That's a following concept. We need a little more leadership that says, oh, it's amoral to bring out another opiate into the marketplace.
Yeah.
That's my position regarding the industry. I'm a little bit defensive.
Well, listen, I think that, again, as I mentioned when we first began, you are more qualified than most. Given your background, I thought that it was definitely a pertinent question to ask for the book and the subject matter that we're discussing. People, again, Amazon and Barnes & Noble are where you got to go. Where Overdosed is the title you have to pick up, and Barry I. Gold is the author you need to thank for bringing it to your table. Now, as I mentioned in my opening, he has 2 other books that you're going to want to check out as well. Operation Independence Day, followed by Gin and Tonic, Heroin, and the Pharmaceutical Industry. All of which, again, are available for purchase through Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. But make sure to check out his personal site, barrygoldwriter.com. Remember, you can't purchase the books through the site, but it's going to be filled with so much information that you're going to want to take advantage of as well. Barry, follow-up question. As we start to close out of this particular book, I do want to give you an opportunity to go into another one of your titles in just a bit. But as we close out, and I think it's already something that has been discussed, already something that we can speculate or assume the answer to, but you know what happens when you do that, so I'm not going to assume, Barry. 2-part question here. First and foremost, who would you say is your intended reader for your book, We're Overdosed, and what is the main message? I know it's informative. It is filled with so much fantastic pieces of information, a wonderful resource, but what do you want people to take upon completing it?
My intended marketplace or market is, I think I said it earlier, is college-educated non-scientists. I don't write for scientists. It's not a textbook. It's a book aimed at people who want to learn about drugs and be able to carry on intelligent conversation or help a family member who is in trouble. And I do go into what do you do if you find an addict or you have an addict in your family? How can you help? I do discuss that. I do discuss treatment modalities. I do discuss reorganizing the federal government to better manage drug development in the country. It is a book that is aimed at educating people about drugs. The expression I use is these drugs have baited hooks. Don't get caught.
Absolutely. You know, a great saying, because the visual that it gives is spot on. And I know I said that was going to be the last question on this book. I can't put it away just yet, though. That last answer that you gave, I think is really something that I think is key to hone in on. Again, in order to educate listening members currently, reorganizing the government, that's a big topic. We'll save that for another interview, okay? We'll invite you back on. We'll go into that in more detail because we can spend an entire interview process just on that topic of discussion. But for listening members now, because this is a drug that affects so many people, I'm sure there are probably people watching currently that have a family member or a close friend that is battling that addiction, or maybe they themselves are battling some of the horrors of that addiction. Where does one begin to overcome the addiction that opioids has caused them?
Very good question. And it's not as big a conundrum as you might think. The important part of an addict getting clean, to use the vernacular, is that the addict has to want to get clean. What we can do as non-drug using family members or friends or public health workers is to say to the addict, I know of a rehabilitative facility, and they will let you in. And that's where recovery from addiction begins, in a rehab facility. Now, what can you do if you find an addict who is unconscious? Because that's a very dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. That addict who's unconscious needs naloxone, Narcan. And Narcan was just placed over the counter by the FDA. So you can buy it at any local drugstore. It's still expensive, but it is available. And it's available in a device known as a nasal insufflator. And that just means you squirt the drug up the patient's nose. A comatose patient or a patient who's asleep from an opiate can't swallow anything. And nobody's going to hand out needles to the general public. So the squirting it up the patient's nose will save that patient's life. Now you'll notice I said patient. I don't believe drug users are criminals.
Yeah.
I think it's a public health issue, and they have to be treated as such. So, what happens after rehab? The patient gets clean. The patient is, during rehab, is given some medication that keeps him off drugs and keeps him from going through withdrawal, which is the horrible side effect to addiction. The next step is something called aftercare. Now, it turns out that there's a large correlation between the amount of aftercare an addict receives and how long the addict can stay clean. So aftercare is very important. And in my book, I discuss a fellow named Vin Martello, who is a public health officer up in Ulster County, New York. That's the town of Kingston. And Vin has forged a public and private partnership for his county. So he contracts with aftercare facilities that are private, but he sends his public patients to them. And it's a wonderful system. He has the best recovery record in all of New York State. And I say he's a good model for the rest of the country. I hope that addresses how one gets clean.
Yeah.
The best thing any non-drug user can do is call your congressman and say, I'm interested in drug abuse, in drug addiction. What are you doing for me in that area? Or Google drug rehab near me, find a telephone number, and provide it to an addict and say, look, I looked this up for you. They'll take you in. That's the best you can do as a non-drug user.
Yeah.
Just be helpful and get involved. I hope that answers your question about how to treat.
Well, absolutely, Barry. Listen, as much as we would like to have things neatly packaged in a step-by-step process, it is something that is going to be as unique as the individual and the circumstance. And like the very first thing that you said, the addict in this instance, or the patient in this instance, they have to be the first ones to acknowledge that they have a problem and want to seek out the service, right? Want to seek out the assistance. At the end of the day, the people around them can give all sorts of helpful information, but if the individual is not ready to address those issues themselves, there's really not much that can be done. So thank you very much. I do think that was, again, it's a difficult question to ask because it does vary based upon the individual. But I believe that was a perfect encapsulation of a process. And people, once you pick up the book, there's a lot more there. We are scratching the surface here today because for this interview, that is really the job. The job is to capture the essence. Now, the goal for you is to pick up copies of your book, have it as a resource on your shelf, get informed. Build the knowledge for yourself. So not only can you get yourself through a particular difficult circumstance, either related to you or those around you. Now, Barry, a moment ago, I mentioned that you had 2 other books available for purchase as well. Well, I want to give you the opportunity. Of course, Where Overdosed was the anchor for today's interview. It was really the one that we wanted to spend the greater amount of time with. But I do want to give you an opportunity to go into one of your other titles. Now, dealer's choice, because nobody knows them as well as you, but you have 2. So pick one of your other books and give us a brief synopsis of what to expect once we pick that one up as well.
Well, the one about the history of the pharmaceutical industry is just my intellectual interest. It's how did the industry come to be? And I'll tell the story about heroin. I was in Dresden, Germany on behalf of an American company I worked for looking at a licensing opportunity. And as I was hurrying to my meeting, I saw a brass plaque on the wall. And I call myself a brass plaque junkie. And I stopped to read the plaque. Now it was in German. My German is adequate. It's not great. And I read the art, and it said heroin and aspirin were invented here. Well, the name of the company we used was an acronym, AWD, and in German it's Arzneimittelwerk Dresden, Medicine Factory of Dresden. And when I was writing the book, I referred to that company and I wrote back to them, and they remembered my visit 20 years before. So that was very amusing. That's how I managed to write that history book as well. The other book is a novel that a spy novel that I wrote, and self-published, and it is available as an ebook from Amazon. But We're Overdosed is my first agented book, published by a real publisher and available in hardcover.
People, I'm telling you, there is a lot happening here. His books are really things that you want. Like, again, Operation Independence Day, if you want something to just kind of help pass the time, it's an entertaining book, right? It's a novel, a journey that you're going to be able to take. Hopefully something that could potentially be on the big screen, because as he's talking about it, I can see a market for it. But if you want something a little bit more historical, right? Gin and tonic, heroin in the pharmaceutical industry, it's got that for you. But Where Overdosed has the history, has the stats to back it up, but it also has so much information that you can implement into your lives today. There is so much here. These are remarkable books to add to your shelf, and Where Overdosed is a fantastic resource that you're going to want to take. And I love the fact that throughout all of this, people, you notice that we didn't once, or Barry didn't once, give a personal stance on whether or not, like, this book is not about whether he approves opioids or does not. It's an informative novel. It's an informative book to really help create more awareness for you as the reader. We know that this is out there. And the pharmaceutical industry, like he said, I'm not one here to bash it. I have my personal opinions. We're going to refrain from certain things. But at the end of the day, we understand that the pharmaceutical industry, although they get a bad rap now, given recent events, it's not all bad. A lot of things that they have created help our lives. Really, I mean, it's the oil that moistens our lives, right? It's the wheel that keeps things going in a lot of instances. So we understand that there is the good and the bad. Well, how do we weather that storm? How do we balance it? This informative narrative is going to be the beginning of a journey to help you have a greater understanding. You got to head on over to Amazon and Barnes & Noble to pick up your copies. Head on over to barrygoldwriter.com, gather more information, and pick up your copies today. While you're at it, as I mentioned before, pick up other copies to add as a gift for someone else to put onto their shelf. Because I'm telling you, it starts with raising that awareness. Knowledge is power. It's the oldest cliche in the book. Well, let's increase yours. Head on over there today, pick up your copies, get lost in it. Barry, this has been a true pleasure, an absolute delight. Thank you once again for being a guest on People of Distinction.
I thank you for the invitation. I enjoyed our discussion. Please, to my listeners, go to my website and you can contact me. There's an email address there. Thank you all.